My name is Zinnia. I came home from my grandmother's 50th wedding anniversary and found her alone in the dark. The catered dinner untouched, and a text on her phone from my uncle. We moved the party. Didn't think you'd want to come? They'd taken $34,000 from her savings account, told her it was for the celebration, and thrown a party she wasn't invited to. Before I say another word, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And tell me this. When was the last time someone in your family made you feel like a guest in your own story? I hadn't been back to Macon, Georgia in almost 3 years, not because I stopped loving my grandmother, because every time I tried to visit, something got in the way, something that, looking back now, always had my uncle's fingerprints on it. A funeral repast I wasn't told about until it was over. A Thanksgiving dinner where my seat just happened to be given to a neighbor. Small erasures, one at a time, like someone slowly turning down the volume on a song until you stop remembering the melody. I drove down from Atlanta on a Friday morning in late September. The kind of morning where the Georgia air smells like cut grass and pine resin, and the sky is that particular shade of blue that makes everything look more hopeful than it probably is. My grandmother, Grammy, we've always called her, had been married to my late grandfather for 50 years before he passed. The anniversary date still mattered to her. She'd mentioned it 3 times in our Sunday calls over the past month. Said my uncle had promised something special. Said even my aunt was flying in from Phoenix. I'd booked a hotel room nearby, not wanting to impose. That was the word Grammy had used when she called me in August. Don't impose, baby. Your uncle's handling everything. I should have known then. The house looked the same from the outside. White siding, black shutters, the azalea bushes Grammy had been growing since before I was born. But no cars in the driveway. No paper lanterns strung from the porch. No sound at all. I knocked. She opened the door herself, still in her house slippers, still wearing the house dress she'd probably put on at 6 in the morning. Her hair was done, she'd gone to the salon. I could tell by the set curls, and she had her pearl earrings in. She'd gotten ready. She'd been ready for hours. "Cindy," she said, and her voice was so small. "Grammy?" I stepped in and hugged her for a long time, longer than was necessary, long enough to feel her relax into it the way she only did when she'd been holding something in. "Where is everyone?" She pulled back, patted my cheek. "They said the venue had an issue. Said they'd moved it downtown. Said they'd call." "When did they say that?" She looked at the wall clock. It was past 4 in the afternoon. Around noon. I looked around the living room. A vase of fresh flowers sat on the hall table. She must have bought them herself. A framed photo of her and my grandfather from their wedding day was propped up on the mantel. There was a small stack of envelopes. Cards probably, arranged neatly beside it. The kind of thing you put out when you expect people to come through your door. No one had come through her door. "Did you eat?" I asked. She shook her head. I was waiting. I went to the kitchen and heated up whatever I could find. We sat at her table, just the 2 of us, and she told me about the plans that had been made. How my uncle had suggested a dinner at the Riverside Events Center. How he'd asked her to transfer money from her savings to cover the deposit in the catering, because it's all going back to the family anyway, Mom. We're just pooling resources. How she'd handed over $34,000 over the course of 4 months in 3 separate transfers. How she hadn't seen a single invoice. I kept my face still. I reached across the table and held her hand. "Did Uncle Terrence say anything about me coming?" I asked carefully. She set down her fork. "He said you were busy. Said you told him you couldn't make it." I had never said that. I had never spoken to Uncle Terrence about this anniversary at all. I hadn't even known the date until Grammy told me herself. I was quiet for a moment. Outside, a mockingbird was going through its repertoire in the magnolia tree. I listened to it for a second, that bird trying on every song it had ever heard. "Grammy," I said. "I never told him that." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked down at her plate. "I didn't think so," she said quietly. "But I didn't know what to believe." I stayed calm. I helped her to the living room, put on the Lawrence Welk reruns she likes, and made her a cup of chamomile. Then I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and started pulling things together. The savings account she'd mentioned. It was a joint account she'd set up years ago with my uncle as a co-signer after my grandfather got sick, so bills could be paid if she was ever in the hospital. I asked her to pull up her bank app on her phone. She handed it to me without hesitation, which told me something about how tired she was of pretending everything was fine. The account had $214 in it. 11 months ago, it had held just over $61,000, her savings from decades of working as a school cafeteria manager, and the life insurance payout from my grandfather's policy. The withdrawals were methodical. Never a single large transfer that might flag an alert. Instead, $8,000 here, $6,500 there, smaller ones sprinkled in between. ATM withdrawals in a town 2 hours from Macon. The last one, $30,200, had cleared on Tuesday. I took screenshots of everything. She fell asleep in the recliner around 8. I turned the TV down low and went to the guest room, which still had the quilt she'd made me when I turned 16. And I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself feel it for exactly 5 minutes. The anger, the grief, the exhaustion of being the one who shows up and finds out how bad it really is. Then I closed my eyes, breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth, and opened my laptop again. I'd been in social work for 6 years. I knew what elder financial exploitation looked like on paper. I also knew that knowing something and being able to prove it in a way that matters were two entirely different things. So I started building the case the right way. I emailed the bank's fraud department with the screenshot documentation and flagged it as a potential elder financial abuse case. I looked up Georgia's Adult Protective Services reporting line and saved the number. Then I searched for the name of the event center my uncle had mentioned, Riverside Event Center, and found that yes, it existed, and yes, it had held an event that evening. I found it on their Facebook page, a 50th anniversary celebration for the Harwick family, posted at 7:14 p.m. with photos of white tablecloths and flower arrangements, and my uncle raising a champagne flute. Grammy wasn't in a single picture. I sat there for a long time, just looking at the photos. There was my uncle, broad-shouldered, tanned, his second wife on his arm in a navy dress. There was my aunt from Phoenix laughing at something. There were cousins I hadn't seen since my grandfather's funeral. They were all there. They'd had a party in my grandmother's honor, with my grandmother's money, and they hadn't brought her. Then I noticed something in the background of one of the photos, a banner, white with gold lettering, celebrating 50 years, the Harwick legacy. Her name wasn't on it. My grandfather's name wasn't on it. It said the Harwick legacy, and every face in that room was there to celebrate themselves. I took a screenshot of the post, the banner, every tagged photo. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the guest room listening to the house settle, the sound of Grammy's television murmuring down the hall. At some point around midnight, I heard her get up, shuffle to the kitchen, get a glass of water. I heard her pause in the hallway. Then her footsteps came to my door and she knocked, very softly. "You still up?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Come in." She sat on the edge of the bed next to me, the way she used to when I was small. She held her water glass with both hands. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "I've known for a while." She paused. "I just didn't want to be the old woman who causes problems." I felt something break open in my chest. "You're not causing problems, Grammy. You're the one who got robbed." She nodded slowly. "Your grandfather used to say Terrence always needed to be the most important person in the room." She looked at the window. "I thought he'd grow out of it." In the morning, I drove to a copy shop and printed everything. The bank records, the screenshots, the event photos. I organized them in a folder and labeled it by date. Then I did something I've been thinking about since midnight. I called my cousin Willa. She's 22, my uncle's daughter from his first marriage, and she'd always been kept at the edges of things just like me. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she'd been waiting for someone to call. "I saw the photos," she said before I could speak. "I know." "I wasn't invited either," she said. "Dad told me Grammy wanted a small immediate family thing, but then I saw the pictures and there were 30 people there." "Willa," I said, "how much do you know about Grammy's finances?" There was a pause. "More than I wish I did," she said. "I saw him on the phone with the bank about 6 months ago. He didn't know I was home. He was transferring something. When he saw me, he hung up and said it was for Grammy's medical bills. She doesn't have any outstanding medical bills, I said. I called her doctor's office last week about her prescription coverage. Her account is clean. Another pause, longer. Zinnia, she said, what do you need? I told her. 2 days later, Willa drove down from Savannah and met me at Grammy's kitchen table. She brought her phone with a text thread she'd photographed, a group chat between my uncle and his wife and someone named R. Del Mar that she'd seen open on his laptop. The messages were from 4 months back. The old lady won't notice if we spread it out. We tell her it's for the venue. She trusts me. And then, from the wife, make sure the girl in Atlanta doesn't find out. She asks too many questions. The girl in Atlanta? I had never introduced myself to my uncle's wife. I'd been at one family gathering in her presence 3 years ago where she'd barely glanced at me, but she knew exactly who I was. She'd been watching. Grammy looked at those messages for a long time. She didn't cry. She just set the phone down on the table and looked out the window at the azalea bushes. 50 years, she said. I kept that money 50 years. I put my hand over hers. That afternoon, I called the Georgia Department of Human Services Adult Protective Services line and filed a formal report. The intake worker was a calm woman who walked me through the documentation they'd need, which I already had ready. She told me the response timeline and what to expect. She used the phrase financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult in a matter-of-fact voice that somehow made it more real than all my research had. Then I called a family law attorney in Macon whose name I'd gotten from a colleague in my field who did elder care advocacy. Her name was Ms. Okafor, and she had a quiet voice and a very precise way of asking questions that told me she'd heard this particular story before, with different names, many times. The cosigner arrangement on the bank account complicates things, she said. But not fatally. The question is whether your uncle can demonstrate that the withdrawals were authorized and for your grandmother's benefit. Given what you've described, that's going to be very difficult for him to show. He's going to say she consented, I said. They always do, she said. But consent requires understanding, and understanding requires full disclosure. Did he tell her where the money was actually going? No, I said. Then we work with that. The family meeting happened the following Saturday. My uncle had called it, which I thought was interesting. He'd reached out to Grammy directly, voice shaking a little on the voicemail she played for me, saying he just wanted to explain that there had been a miscommunication, that he was so sorry she felt left out. She felt left out. That was the framing, like she'd simply misread a social cue. He arrived at 11 with his wife, both dressed casually, rehearsed casual, the kind of clothes you wear when you want to seem like you're not performing. I was already there. I'd been there since 8. He stopped when he saw me standing in the kitchen doorway, just for a half second. Then the smile came back. Zinnia. He spread his hands. Good, good, I'm glad you're here. This is a family matter. It is, I said. We sat in the living room. Grammy was in her chair, Willa beside her on the arm of it. My uncle sat on the sofa across from us. His wife perched next to him, ankles crossed, holding a tote bag with a logo on it from a real estate company. His real estate company, the one he'd apparently expanded in the past 2 years. He began with a story about how much he loved Grammy, how hard he'd worked to plan this anniversary celebration, how there had been a terrible misunderstanding about the guest list and the timing. I let him talk. He had a gift bag with him, which he presented with a kind of ceremony that was clearly meant to shift the emotional atmosphere of the room. Inside was a framed photo from the party Grammy hadn't attended, and the gift card to a restaurant she'd mentioned liking. Grammy looked at the photo for a moment, then she set it face down on the side table. "Terrence," she said, "where did my money go?" The room went very still. He started in on the venue costs, the catering deposit, the flowers, the rentals. He had numbers ready, which told me he prepared for this question. The numbers added up to approximately $19,000, which left $15,000 unaccounted for from what Grammy had transferred, and said nothing about the additional $27,000 that had come out of her account in other withdrawals over the past year. I opened my folder. These are the bank statements from Grammy's account going back 14 months, I said, and I slid copies across the coffee table toward him. I've highlighted the withdrawals. The ones that correspond to your stated venue costs are here. I pointed. The ones that don't are here. He looked at the papers. He didn't touch them. I'd also like to address the ATM withdrawals made in Augusta, I said. Grammy has never, to my knowledge, traveled to Augusta in the past year. Her mobility has made that difficult. His wife shifted in her seat. And I have documentation here. I laid the photographs down, the banner, the tagged photos, the event check-in list that Willa had found when she called the venue directly, showing that the event for which Grammy transferred funds was attended by 31 guests, none of whom appear to have been told that Grammy herself was not present. She wasn't feeling well, my uncle said. His voice had changed, flatter now, like a door closing. Grammy, I said, were you not feeling well on Saturday? She looked at him with the particular steadiness of someone who has decided to stop being kind about a hard thing. I got dressed and waited all day, she said. He leaned forward, the charm dropping away like a coat he'd gotten tired of wearing. You don't know what it costs to manage her affairs, he said to me. You show up twice a year and think you understand what's happening here. I've been the one handling everything. I know, I said. That's the problem. He started to say something else, and I opened my phone and pressed play. It was a voice memo, Grammy and I sitting at her kitchen table the night I arrived, just talking. She hadn't known I was recording. I hadn't told her I was, not then, because I hadn't wanted to change what she said. Georgia is a one-party consent state. I'd checked before I pressed the button. Her voice came through the phone speaker, low and steady, describing the transfers, the instructions she'd been given, the party she'd been told to wait for. He said I'd be the guest of honor. He said it was my party. And then my uncle's voice, on a separate recording Willa had made of a phone call 3 months ago when she'd asked him directly where Grammy's money was going. It's going toward the family assets, Willa. Grammy understands that. She's fine with it. Grammy understands that. His wife stood up. This is a setup, she said. You planned this. I came prepared, I said. That's different. My uncle looked at Grammy. Whatever calculation he was running behind his eyes, it finished, and the result must have surprised him, because for a moment he looked like a man who had just realized the room he thought he was in charge of had different walls than he expected. Mom, he said, and his voice was soft again, soft in the way that had probably worked for decades. You know I love you. Grammy looked at him for a long moment. She had her hands folded in her lap, her pearl earrings still in from the day she'd gotten dressed for the party that didn't happen. I know you did, she said, past tense. Miss Okafor had already filed the civil complaint by Tuesday. The Adult Protective Services investigation opened that same week. The bank fraud report, combined with the documented withdrawals and the absence of any receipts or contracts for the stated expenses, was enough to freeze the joint account and flag the transactions for review. My uncle hired an attorney. His attorney sent a letter suggesting that Grammy had been unduly influenced by outside family members, meaning me, and that her statements should be evaluated in the context of her age and cognitive changes. She was 71 years old. She did the New York Times crossword puzzle every morning. She remembered the name of every teacher I'd had through 8th grade. I forwarded the letter to Ms. Okafor, who responded in the way that attorneys respond when they find the opposing argument thin, with a very precise, very calm, very thoroughly documented rebuttal. The weekend before Thanksgiving, I drove back to Macon. Not for a meeting, not for a hearing, just to be there. I brought groceries. I brought the ingredients for her sweet potato pie because she'd mentioned she hadn't made it in 2 years, hadn't felt like it, and I thought maybe this year she should feel like it again. We stood in her kitchen on a Saturday afternoon, the oven warming the whole house, and she talked about my grandfather. About the year they'd spent almost nothing on Christmas because they were saving for a down payment on this house. About the way he used to sing off-key to the radio on Sunday mornings. About the look on his face when I was born and he held me in the hospital, this tiny man who cried and tried to hide it by looking at the ceiling. He would have been furious, she said, rolling pie crust with the practiced ease of someone who has done it 1,000 times. At Uncle Terrence? At himself, she said, for not seeing it sooner, for thinking love was enough protection. I didn't say anything. I measured out the spices. But he would have been proud of you, she said, and didn't look up from the crust, and I had to concentrate very hard on the measuring. The civil case settled in February. The terms required full repayment of the documented withdrawals, all $61,000, plus legal fees over a structured timeline with an independent trustee overseeing compliance. The joint account arrangement was dissolved. A new account in Grammy's name alone was established with me as her designated financial power of attorney, reviewed annually by an independent elder law advocate. My uncle did not go to prison. The criminal referral is still under review, from what Miss Okafor has told me, and I've learned not to put too much weight on timelines that other people control. What I know is that Grammy's money is being returned. What I know is that she is living in her house with the azalea bushes, and she calls me on Sunday evenings, and last month she started the crossword on a Tuesday and didn't finish until Thursday and called me very indignant about it. Willa drives down from Savannah sometimes on weekends. They've started doing jigsaw puzzles together, the 1,000-piece ones with the small pieces that Grammy always said gave her a headache, but which she is apparently now very committed to. I went back for Easter. We sat on the back porch in the afternoon sun, Grammy in the old lawn chair with the faded blue stripes, and she was quiet for a while in the way she gets sometimes, looking at the yard like she's reading something written in it. I kept thinking, she said finally, that if I made enough room for everyone, everyone would stay. I didn't answer right away. That's not how it works, she said. I know that now. The yard was full of light. The azalea bushes were starting to bloom, that particular coral pink color that only happens for about 2 weeks in April, and then it's over, and you have to have been paying attention to catch it. You know what the hardest part was? She asked. What? Not the money. She shook her head. I can live without the money. I lived without a lot of things. She paused. The hardest part was realizing I'd been making myself smaller for so long that I'd forgotten I didn't have to. The light shifted. A cardinal landed in the yard and was gone. I reached over and held her hand, and we sat there until the sun moved behind the tree line and the evening came in cool and slow, the way evenings do in Georgia in the spring, easy and unhurried, like they've got nowhere else to be. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and telling the truth? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. I keep coming back to the image of Grammy in her house slippers, pearl earrings in, hair freshly set, standing in the doorway of a house that had been silent all day. She'd gotten dressed for a celebration that her own son had never intended to let her attend. She waited with the patience of someone who had spent a lifetime making room for other people, and that patience, that particular practiced, selfless patience, was exactly what they had counted on. That's the thing about people who exploit the ones they're supposed to love. They don't target strangers. They target the people who have already proven they'll wait, they'll forgive, they'll make themselves smaller to keep the peace. Grammy had been doing that for years without realizing it had become a survival strategy for someone else's greed. I've thought a lot about what made the difference in how this ended. It wasn't luck, and it wasn't that I happened to show up on the right day. It was 3 things working together, and I think about them every time I'm tempted to stay quiet about something that matters. The first was doing what was right even when it was uncomfortable. Filing that APS report, calling Ms. Okafor, sitting across a coffee table from my uncle and laying down bank statements, none of that felt good in the moment. It felt like breaking something. But what I've come to understand is that the thing that was already broken wasn't my doing. I just stopped pretending the crack wasn't there. Doing right by Grammy meant being willing to be the one who said it out loud, even knowing my uncle would call it a betrayal, even knowing my mother might not speak to me for months. You can't protect someone and stay comfortable at the same time. I had to choose. The second was thinking clearly instead of reacting. Every instinct I had that first night wanted to call my uncle and scream, but I sat with Grammy, I listened, I took notes, I slept on it. I called the bank before I called family. I documented before I confronted. Willa brought me a screenshot and I took it straight to the attorney, not to a group text. When my uncle sat down in Grammy's living room and started his practiced explanation, I wasn't angry. I was ready. Clarity is what I had spent those weeks building, and it was the only thing that actually helped her. The third was not quitting when it got hard, because it did get hard. The letter from his attorney suggesting Grammy had cognitive decline, that one sat on my chest for 2 days. The months of the civil case dragging, of not knowing, of Grammy asking me carefully on Sunday calls if it was going to be okay. Willa driving down from Savannah again and again. Ms. Okafor sending patient, measured emails that I sometimes read 4 or 5 times just to feel sure. The kind of endurance that a situation like this requires isn't dramatic. It's just showing up again, filing the next form, making the next call, not letting the slowness of legal process become a reason to give up. Grammy's money came back, not all at once, not without cost, but it came back. And she is in her house with her azalea bushes and her crossword puzzle and her 1,000-piece jigsaw she does with Willa on weekends. And when I think about what almost happened, what would have happened, if I hadn't driven down that Friday, I understand that outcomes like hers don't happen by accident. They happen because someone decided it was worth it to do the hard thing.